think that's a vastly different category because of the resources that they had at their disposal. So that's how I kind of narrowed it down to these particular individuals. Dan.
Would you mind relating the book and the cases that you reviewed to the Venezuelan situation now, and also what are some differences, especially with regard to, back 30 years ago, 20 years ago, media reports were, when I grew up, you could watch 3 stations and they all reported the same thing. So it didn't matter which one you watched, really. And now everybody gets information from different places and with different, colorations. So
yeah.
Would you mind talking a little bit about?
Yeah, and I think the stuff with going on in Venezuela right now, I think, has made this even more relevant. So, I mean, if I had another year or 2 to work on this, I might even incorporate some of Venezuela stuff into this book. I was struck by how Trump in particular has talked about these people in the boats that he's blowing up right now. He refers to them as narco-terrorists, which is something from the 1980s, coming right out of this book. Unlawful combatants. That's what he's referred to these targets as, unlawful combatants. That's something the Bush administration used in the global war on terror. And he also called these cartels savage. He says this on the floor of the United Nations 2 months ago. And I'm not trying to suggest that these cartels aren't so bad. This is not a and even with these stories here, I'm not trying to do like any kind of image rehabilitation for any of these individuals. I'm trying to point out the utility of the language. But I was struck by how Trump used those particular terms. I'm like, oh, that's what I'm mentioning right here in this book. And it has justified the United States to then start taking aim at these boats. We don't know exactly what they're carrying, who these people are. This is different than what the United States has done in the past with suspected drug smugglers at sea. The Coast Guard has stopped the boats, inspected them, would arrest the suspects. They would be tried. It's a criminal case. But now, by calling them savages, unlawful combatants, narco-terrorists, it's justifying just killing these individuals. And so that's where I think the language is useful in changing up the way in which the United States is pursuing this policy of counter-narcotics. You see this militarization of the war on drugs, much like the war on terror is a militarization of counterterrorism. We've had terrorism forever. We've had terrorism throughout American history. But counterterrorism becomes much more militarized after 9/11. What we're seeing now, I think, is a militarization of the war on drugs. And your other point about media, yeah, media is so proliferated now, you can find anything you want almost. But one of the things I did find interesting is that by going through a variety of press outlets in this book, I did find a wide range of opinions of these different individuals, which I was struck by. So the Sandino chapter, for example, in a lot of newspapers, the New York Times, Boston Globe, Washington Post, often referred to Sandino as a bandit. But I also came across others that said, well, maybe he's got a point. There was The Nation, which was a popular magazine in its day, still around. There was an American reporter who goes down, talks to Sandino, writes about Sandino, writes fairly sympathetically about Sandino, gives a vastly different perspective. So I did find that interesting in my own research that, oh yeah, there kind of was a spectrum of differing opinions and viewpoints of some of these individuals over the years. But I do take your point, like, media today is just so it's proliferated to such an extent with all these different perspectives that, yeah, you can find anything now. Now it's in the 21st century, it feels overwhelming to me. But you can get all sorts of different perspectives for sure. Yeah.
How do you think the foreign policy played a role in the verbiage that was used to describe the individuals in your case studies?
So I think in a lot of these cases, well, in all these cases, the United States has had some sort of interest at stake or security at stake that it's trying to defend to then justify, okay, well, we really got to go after these people because they're they're threatening our interests. The Philippine example, I think, is the one that immediately comes to mind in the sense that the United States in 1899 annexes the Philippines with the idea of trying to get a stepping stone into markets in Asia, in China specifically. And then you have this Aguinaldo guy and these rebels who are fighting and killing people, and we can't have that. That's gonna mess up our our aims in Asia. So that's one of the justifications to go after them. And I think likewise in post 9/11, the United States has been involved in the Middle East for decades. One resource in particular that the U.S. is greatly interested in protecting is oil, of course. And to have somebody threaten that, like Bin Laden or any of the other jihadist groups that are out there, that's something the United States just can't abide by. So I think having these interests is important, but also there's a presumption, particularly in the cases, the Latin American case studies that I have here. I have 4 of them set in Latin America. That's the United States backyard. We have to make sure there's order and stability in our backyard. It's more important than any place else. So there always is the presumption, I think, of maintaining order and stability there. That is driving a justification to tamp down these threats. Yes, Milo.
Going on with the question that was asked previously, I want to know where that aha moment in your research was when you really were like, I need to write about this rhetoric, and you were kind of making that connection, and you were like, this is it, I have to get my story out there, and I have to tell people about this research.
Oh, good question. I feel like it came fairly early because, so one of the earlier chapters, the first chapter that I started writing was the one on Pancho Villa. I'll go back to him for a second so we can see what we're talking about. When reading a little bit more about his attack on Columbus, New Mexico, and just the way in which he's described, as a bandit, the savage, outlaw, all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, wow, this kind of sounds like Bin Laden in a lot of ways. And that's why I kind of thought, there's something between Villa and Bin Laden here, and this contemporary war on terror. So this is going back to like 2017, 2018 timeframe. Like, okay, there's something here. And so I do have an article, a journal article that I did about Villa as a version of like a Mexican war on terror of 1916-17. So I think that's kind of the first aha moment, like, okay, I got something. But then I'm like, okay, well, are there other examples here? And as I researched some of these other individuals, Sandino, the way in which he's talked about, that sounds similar. Go back to Aguinaldo, this idea that he's a savage, and the kinds, and also it's the way in which these opponents are fighting against the United States. Folks might call it irregular warfare. And they do so not necessarily because there's some sort of ideology behind it or natural primitiveness to it, but because the United States military has overwhelming firepower, technological superiority, a lot of times numerical superiority. So how do you, just on a practical level, how do you fight back against an opponent that is so much stronger than you? Well, you have to do all these other kinds of things to try to mitigate their advantages. That's what a lot of these individuals were doing, but because they're doing that, then they're seen as savage, bandit. Yeah. Aguinaldo in particular, when the Filipino-American War first starts, Aguinaldo was conscious of this, and he's really trying to attack the United States, like literally on battle lines, because he's trying to show Europeans, because the Spanish also were, denigrated these Filipinos as savages, that they weren't ready for independence. So Aguinaldo is trying to say, all right, I'll show you guys, I'm going to fight the Americans toe-to-toe, and he gets crushed. And so in short order, it's like, okay, I got to try something else to defeat the Americans. And so he uses the hit-and-run tactics and the guerrilla tactics and so forth. So this kind of gets back at, I see these connections, this sounds familiar, and I'm seeing these patterns in researching these individuals. And so that is one of the things about this study, is trying to find these continuities, these through lines.
Has like America helped influence other nations to kind of adapt their own language into this, and like, or has it kind of stayed within the scope of American government?
Oh, that's an excellent question. Had I cast a wider net, I think I could probably provide a better answer to that, more specific answer to that. So having not done a whole lot of research what other countries have done, I also don't want to suggest that the United States is the only country that's ever faced terrorism, of course. We know that's not the case. So having not done a whole lot of research outside that, using that global scope, it would be hard for me to give any specific answers to that. But I don't want to suggest that this is only unique to the United States either. The denigration of opponents, goes on all the time. I mean, Paul had mentioned about Dower's book, War Without Mercy, set in World War II, and the way in which Americans denigrated the Japanese made it easier to kill them. The Japanese did likewise, the way in which the Japanese viewed the United States at the time, easier to kill Americans. So this is not unique, but I did purposely kind of just keep my scope, try to focus specifically on the United States for this one rather than, or what American perspectives were, not necessarily like, Israel's been involved obviously in a lot of counterterrorism campaigns. Putin has used that as an excuse for a variety of things that he's done in the 21st century compared to his neighbors. Chinese have done that relative to the Uyghur population in China these days. So all that stuff it kind of seeps in with these other countries as well. But I'm struggling to think of a specific one-to-one comparison. But it is an excellent question. Yeah. Grace.
Do you plan on continuing the research for this, like making another book based off of this research or touching on another topic?
Yeah, so I'm kicking around two studies. One of which I feel like I need to write or finish off like an imperial trilogy. So the first book is about American empire relative to Cuba. The second book is about American empire relative to terrorism. And I think the third book, I have this idea of a biography of Teddy Roosevelt's right-hand man in the early 20th century, who, spoiler, he's mentioned in both of these books. So I'm not even going to mention the name. I'm going to wait until somebody, I'm going to see if somebody can go back to me like, oh, were you talking about... So you're just going to have to look at both books. But that individual, I think, sets a template for future American occupations. So he's around in the early 20th century, but the United States is going to occupy Haiti and the Dominican Republic and Nicaragua, and you take it right up to the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq in the 21st century. Again, I haven't done a whole lot of research yet, although I do know of this individual fairly well going back to my grad school days. But I do think that there's another through line here of his influence into the 21st century that no one's written about. No one's written about this guy since the 1950s. And I think he's important to the development of American empire. So I'm kicking that idea around. I'll mention this too. A friend of mine really wants me to write a book about politics and wrestling. So I think he's got something there. So I may come back to it. It's one or the other. It's like fork in the road. Which way do I go? I don't know. So we'll see. But thanks for the question, Grace. Yes.
Did Bin Laden and 9/11 kickstart this whole project? Was that the driving force, and then the look back?
You mean for me to
Yeah.
to think of this? By the time I started thinking of this project, this is 2017. I was trying to think of what's my next book going to be about, and I was so steeped in teaching this war on terror class. There's so many things that I had, and that's interesting. And I think for all my faculty colleagues here, it's like to teach something, you really have to learn about something, and you learn so much to be able to teach it. You need to. So it was developing this course that got me to thinking, okay, I got a book here, I got something, and it really kind of snowballed from trying to better understand the historical roots of a contemporary issue. So to better understand for students and myself, like, where did 9/11 come from? 9/11 doesn't come out of a vacuum. And trying to better understand how and why it happened. And as I'm trying to research this, I keep going back and keep going back, keep going back. At some point, you have to kind of cut it off, otherwise you just... I have to tell you too, my initial conception of this book was really going to look at the entire swath of American history, which I guess now that we're up to America 250, maybe that would have been a good selling point too. But I was going to go back to the Barbary pirates, and I was going to bring in the Indian Wars of the 19th century. But there were two reasons I didn't go that far back. Number one, the Barbary states and American Indians at this time frame were both semi-sovereign people, and I'm trying to focus more specifically on non-state actors. So that was one thing. And secondly, out of practicality, I'd been working on this thing for years. It's like, okay, I got to cut it off here at some point. And then I thought, as I kind of came to these 6 individuals here, I could kind of see the post-1898 overseas empire framing a little bit more clearly. So that's how it kind of came into focus. From the upper deck.
So just one comment and then one kind of long question. So the comment is, I love that you connected Via to Osama when I was going through that chapter. I just kept thinking, like, especially by the end of Via, when he started getting more aggressive and extreme, it really seemed like the only difference between the two, other than the religious fundamentalism, was just means of technology. Like, if Via had access to greater pieces of technology, I feel like he absolutely would have caused more damage.
Yeah.
And to move to the question, and I apologize for the long setup, but I think it's important. You keep saying these 6 men attacked the United States, and I understand what you're saying, but that's kind of reductionist. They're attacking more the federal government of the United States. They don't necessarily care too much about the average mom and pop in the middle of Wyoming. They care about the American empire, the empiricism of it all. And as you said, as they're attacking the empire and the empire grows, the empire wants to go after what it deems to be threats to itself. You also said that the CIA coined the term narco-terrorism. So do you see how, and maybe I'm putting you on the spot with something like this, do you see how, is there a domestic element to this that you can see today? Another term that the CIA coined in the 60s was conspiracy theorists. And we kind of denote some of the same, maybe not criminality, but definitely illegitimacy, definitely crazy kind of people who you shouldn't take seriously. Even today, we can go even more further into the future, talk about the relevancy of it. We hear fascist again today a lot. Not necessarily maybe in the correct sense, but it seems that this type of rhetoric, I mean, even a couple years ago, it was going around called stochastic terrorism or something along those lines, where it was the use of rhetoric with the means to cause harm, if that's just a broad definition that can be briefed on really quickly. Can you see how the federal government, as the global empire, may have turned some of this rhetorical devices into towards the domestic population against people it may deem threats to its legitimacy, its empire?
Yeah. So for the most part, the book is focused on threats abroad. And it's not to suggest that these are the only terror threats the United States has ever faced. Certainly there have been domestic terrorists throughout American history. I mean, go back to the Ku Klux Klan of the 19th century and anarchists of the early 20th. You got the Unabomber and McVeigh in Oklahoma City. So we have all sorts of these examples of domestic terror. But I think, much like, Austin, you had asked me about how international, other countries around the world have kind of employed this playbook. It's something I didn't research really at all, that aspect, but it's still an important question to ask, and I think Tom likewise. In terms of, domestic terrorism and how terminology is used, I focused less on that, or not at all for this book, because I'm trying to think about the United States engagement with the world as a primarily a foreign policy historian. That's the thing I'm most interested in. But I would say, think about how political opponents of any stripe are described, and just to subject those terms to scrutiny, to just think about it. In no way am I trying to suggest that Osama bin Laden was not a terrorist at all. I think he fits the definition, as we talked about in the War on Terror class, right? It's about using violence or threatening violence for a political or social objective. That's what bin Laden does, absolutely. But is there a usefulness or utility to calling somebody a terrorist? And that's one of the things that I think is important to consider here in the present. Why are some of these terms used? Is there a usefulness to this? Is this enabling those in power to exert their power in a particular way because they're using these kinds of terms to describe opponents or challengers? So that's what I would ask of all of you. Anytime you read the news and hear depictions of individuals, okay, well, why that word? What does that mean? What are the implications of that?